Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingston, Texas, USA. Another episode of Controversial Issues with Rabbi Chaim Coffman. Welcome back. Rabbi, how are you today, sir?
Doing great. Always a pleasure to be here.
Very good. Very good. Same here. Likewise.
I don't know if it's a pleasure for everybody else, but it's always fun. We always have a good time.
You don't shortchange yourself. You do great. You do great.
We get people upset I short out your system. It's beautiful. What could be better on this beautiful day?
That's funny. I see you find delight in strange things. Okay, fine.
Come on, even when people are making fun of me and saying I'm too loud and, I speak too fast and all these things, it's all good. It's all good. As my Rebbe once said, if you're a rabbi of a synagogue and they're not trying to drive you out, then you're not doing the job right.
That's funny.
So I fit in exactly right over here.
Well, you can't please everybody. So.
Who said I'm trying to please anyone? That's the whole point. It's about the rating.
That's true. That's true. I saw a T-shirt. It says I'm only obligated to please one person per day, and today is not your day. It says tomorrow is not looking very good either. I gotta love the humor, that's for sure. All right. Okay. Well,
you ever see the bumper sticker? The bumper sticker: JC saves and Moshe invests.
Oh, that's funny. That's good. That's funny.
Or JC saves and Gretzky scores on the rebound. That's a little bit older, but.
That's funny. That's funny. All right, I'm gonna pass it on to you, and you can take us home.
You didn't even introduce the topic. Well, it's okay.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. So why does it appear that the rabbis are always arguing? Why can't they just agree on something? It's really interesting. I hear Christians asking that, but they don't realize that there's literally thousands of different translations of their own Bible. So it's like the pot calling the kettle black.
You mean bad translations, right?
There you go. There you go.
Not even good ones. Yeah. So definitely is a common question why it seems that we're always arguing. We know, the first disagreement we have is, Hillel Shammai, right? Major disagreement, the house of Hillel, the house of Shammai. Seems like, they argued for a long time. And sometimes you see, as the Talmud brings out and, the commentaries say against one another, sometimes I once saw one of the later commentaries say, it's too bad. Imagine they didn't have paper way back when. So like anything they wrote on, and they found to write on was like pretty, it's pretty miraculous. So, one of the commentaries says, well, not only did you miss the boat, but it's, such a waste of paper over here, the paper that they don't have. And look, you wasted all this time, all this effort, and you're totally wrong. Now, you could say, well, isn't that a little bit harsh? It seems like, people disagree. You have to have respect. You're right. Right. Definitely has to be mutual respect. That there's no question, but it certainly can be heated up, right? Arguments, if you're trying to find the truth, and someone says something that's not truthful, it's not someone showing up somebody else. I've seen that also, which is wrong, right? It's not about agreeing to disagree either, right? Either, you can say, well, my explanation may be just as valid as someone else's. But there's a problem because we know the code of Jewish law is solidified. We know the code of Jewish law that was written down by Rabbi Yosef Karo, in the 1600s or 1500s, 1600s, and then you have the commentators, you have the commentators on that. Then you got the later commentaries, still the commentaries today, right? So everything, within every generation, because the Torah says, book of Deuteronomy, the Torah tells me there's an obligation to listen to the Kohanim in every generation, listen to the Levites whenever they say, someone took me to task, took me to task last week, didn't answer me because I spoke about it, so I sent him the video, right? One of the comments on last week's video, and the whole thing is, oh, come on, you're adding to the Torah, you're not allowed to add to the Torah. It doesn't say like that, obviously, someone most likely a Karaite doesn't believe in oral law, but, someone defended me. Actually, I do have some defenders out there, a few. So someone said, what do you do with this? What do you do with these verses, in the book of Deuteronomy? So they said, well, I agree that they have to judge, they have to be the policeman, sort of the generation, but you're not allowed to add and subtract, right? You're not allowed to add and subtract to the Torah. So we understand, we've spoken about oral law before, right? But, so I read over the verses. If you look at the verses over there, it says clear, right? Let me just read it here. Let me make sure people don't think I'm making this up. It's a book of Deuteronomy. I think it's chapter 17. 1 second. Yeah, chapter 17, the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 17, starting with verse 8. Right? Because it says, if a matter of judgment's hidden from you, between blood and blood, between verdict and verdict, plague and plague, matter of dispute in your city shall rise up and ascend to the place Hashem God will choose. Verse 9, you shall come to the Kohanim, the priests, the Levites, the judge who will be in those days, who shall inquire, right? In those days, meaning all generations. They will inquire, they will tell you the word of judgment. You shall do according to the word that they tell you from the place that Hashem will choose. Blah, blah, blah. According to verse 11, according to the teaching that they will teach you, according to the judgment they will say to you, shall you do. You don't deviate from the word that they will tell you, right or left. Now, this is kind of crucial. Verse 12, the man will act with willfulness, not listening to the Kohen who stands there to serve Hashem your God. What's the punishment? Or to the judge, right? You're going to act willfully, against this judge. What's the punishment? Death. The man shall die. You shall destroy the evil from among your people. And the entire nation shall listen in fear. They shall not act willfully anymore. So not only do you have to listen to the rabbis in every generation, that states clear, but not doing so, if you don't do so, you're liable for a death penalty. Whatever they tell you. What's right is left, what's left is right. Whatever they tell you. Now, that being the case, someone says, yeah, but, okay, so I'll agree. They have, you have to listen to them, but who says they're allowed to add or subtract? But doesn't the Torah I just read? The Torah says clear. If that's the case, you don't deviate from what they say. You're right, they can't add or subtract. By making a fence around the Torah, that's not adding or subtracting. But whatever they tell you, you have to do. They can't go against what the Torah says. They can't go against what Moshe Rabbeinu says. And if you don't do it, what's the punishment? Death. Now, if you've ever seen, anyone's ever been in the yeshiva, you see people learning, each person has a study partner, whatever the case is, they're learning, they're going back and forth, arms flying, screaming even louder than I can scream, and they're going on and on. Why are they going on and on? They're going on and on to understand what the text says. They want to know, is this 100% true? Because if what you're saying isn't true, then you can't say that. Right? You can't just make up anything you want. Right? You can't just say, well, I think this because whatever. Right? Yeah, it has to make sense. You have to prove it. You have to have evidence. And if you don't have evidence and the other person's right, you have to acknowledge. You should acknowledge that the other person's right because it's all about truth. It's all about truth. Now you're going to tell me. The Talmud says, come on. The Talmud says, Rava says this, Abaye says that, Rav Chaim says something else, right? It's not a big game of telephone. We're not necessarily, going into oral law. But the point is they disagree. Right now, even if they disagree, there are two worlds that we live in the Orthodox world when a person's learning. The world of lumdus, the world of what would I call it here? It's a good question. The world of lumdus, I would call it's like you're learning, when you're trying to get to all the nook and crannies about what you're learning. You're trying to delve into all these different possibilities. Maybe say like this, maybe like that. Do they agree? Do they disagree? Etc. And then we get into the world of Jewish law. Now, the world of getting down to the nitty-gritty in the world of Jewish law, they do overlap. Because obviously the code of Jewish law is going to hold according to, either an opinion of the Talmud, or maybe how the Rambam learned, or one of the other commentaries learned, and they felt that was the right way to learn, whatever it is. So now, this is the ultimate proof that, when we're analyzing a subject, whatever the subject is, right? Let's say it's in the laws of Shabbos, right? The laws of Shabbos. So in the laws of Shabbos, there are 39 categories, even though the Torah only mentions 3. What does the Torah mention? You're not allowed to cook. You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to carry. Right. That's the second one, and the third one is. Third one is you're not allowed to cook. You're not allowed to carry. I'll think of the third one in a second. So there are 3 that the Torah mentions. You're not allowed. Sorry, you're not allowed to kindle a fire. That's the third one. Right? You're not allowed to cook. You're not allowed to kindle a fire. You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to carry. Now the Torah doesn't give me any definitions. Right? So now there's a whole question. Okay, it says, you're not allowed to kindle a fire. So what type of fire are we talking about? Are we talking about real fire? Right? It's an oven, one type of oven. Right? Talmud goes into great detail. What about returning something to the fire? What about if the fire itself, let's say it's not lit, it's just you got the coals there burning, right? But it's all covered up. I can't stoke the coals anymore. And I put something on top. I put something on top of this. Does it have to be fully cooked? Does it not have to be fully cooked? There are a lot of detail that the Torah does not say. Right? So the Torah is only an outline. So now I have to get to oral law. Now I have to understand. Now I have to understand all these different cases. Even if the case itself, we don't go according to Jewish law. Now, wouldn't it be a lot easier? It would be a lot easier just to say, okay, this is the opinion we hold by. We'll cut to the chase. We'll make the tractate, instead of 150 pages, we'll make it 75. We'll make it 62. We'll make it a lot easier. Be a lot easier to follow. Right? But we're going to be all inclusive over here. Why? Because whatever somebody says, there has to be a litmus test. Does everybody agree? Does everyone agree exactly what they said? Are there variances? Meaning, maybe, okay, person made a statement, maybe only part of the statement is true, not the whole statement, right? It has to go, according to, some level of a test to see if it's going to stand, to see if that's going to stand or not. Now, even if they come up to some sort of consensus, then you have to see, okay, now you got the other commentaries. You got early commentators, later commentators. You're going to see what they do. You're going to see what they do. Some will agree, some will disagree, right? And some will disagree to the point where it's a little, the language is a little bit different. So you could say, well, there's picayune detail, right? There's a little bit of difference in what they said, but it makes all the difference in the ramifications when it comes to Jewish law. So we want to be all inclusive. We don't want to say, oh, it's just this opinion. It's my way or the highway, right? We're just going to give the right opinion, right? We're going to make you sweat over here because there's a lot more going on. Now, that being said, it's clear that, if they're going to argue, the argument could be very well heated. It could be a very, very strong argument. But even if it's a strong argument, they still have the ultimate respect one for the other. Because there were many, many things. The house of Hillel disagreed with the house of Shammai, right? And, and their students had what to do with each other. They married into each other's families, right? So even though they disagreed, and they might have disagreed vehemently, in very strong ways, where one says this is forbidden, one says, it's permissible, there can be myriad ramifications. But even you're going to say they disagree, it doesn't just say agree to disagree, right? It goes beyond that. Because if something's really forbidden, right, let's say when it comes to marriage, and the house of Hillel holds one thing's permissible, and the house of Shammai says, no, it's forbidden. But they allowed their students to marry into other families, right? The house of Hillel and the house of Shammai. So what does that tell you? So it tells you, well, maybe they're open-minded, a little more open-minded, even though they disagreed. And it doesn't mean they disqualified other people, right? They disqualified their colleagues, unless, now this is really pretty much, where it comes in today, it comes into this topic is that, they can disagree. They can even disagree very strongly, but they should have absolute respect, right? There should be absolute respect one for the other. Certainly can't speak Lashon Hara, libel and all that. Motzi Shemra, as we would call it, giving someone a bad name. There has to be respect. At the same time, what happens if a person, veers off, like really veers off, and they're not religious anymore, or they're heretical. They say heretical things. So you see people out there yell and scream, jump up and down, myself included, against people that distort the Torah. Now that's a different issue. That's a different issue. Why is it a different issue? It's a different issue for one very simple reason, because we are stuck on the truth. Right? Most people know. If you don't know, you find out right now. You want to get under my skin? One good way to do it is to skew the truth. Right? It's to fudge it, in my language. Right? To make it up as you go along. And then try and bring it over, try and give it over and say, this is the absolute truth when it really isn't. Or a person may say, yeah, like someone commented on one of my posts and say, what do you think about, Exodus chapter 18, verse 23, which over there speaks about homosexuality? Do you believe this is the word of God? So that was a very easy answer. Yes. So they said, wait a minute, if you believe this is the word of, a word of God, you think God's going to kill someone who does it? I said, well, we can't kill anyone today. We don't have a temple in Jerusalem. We don't have a Sanhedrin. It was just the very strict judgment over here, also by desecrating Shabbos, the most severe of corporal punishment. Okay, that's also true. But even if we didn't kill anybody, or you're not going to kill anybody today, but what's the Torah telling you? It's egregious, right? It's a horrific thing to do. It should not be done, right? So what did the person answer to that? Well, that's being homophobic. That's being homophobic. So I said, well, there were 600,000 Jews between the ages of 20 and 60. They heard the Torah being given at Mount Sinai. That means there were about 3 million people. So it's either you believe it's true or it's not true. The Christians agree we got the Torah. The Muslims agree we got the Torah. Now they say we're not chosen anymore, whatever they're going to say. But at the end of the day, they both agree. So now you can tell me, well, we don't eat pig. We're anti-pig. Maybe. We're anti-non-Jew. We're anti-women. We may be anti all these things. But you know what? If God gave the Torah, and everyone agrees God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, now we have to understand it. Now we have to go figure out what it all means. And by saying that means, yeah, if God gave the Torah and he said that's forbidden, I believe it's forbidden. So this person said, well, that's not the type of God I believe in. Okay. It goes against your agenda. Very good. There are many things. Feminism may go against your agenda. There's other things may go against your agenda. Right? But the point is, okay, we're going to take the Torah what it says. Now we have to understand it. So now you could have somebody that says, why did I bring this up? Because someone will be out there and someone will say, I know the ultra-Orthodox are going to get upset with me. This person saying that they're not only an Orthodox Jew, an Orthodox rabbi, they're going to say, you know what? People are going to get upset for me saying this, and that is that God is not going to kill homosexuals. God is not going to take care of them. And I do understand, as this person said, I do understand, the elder Orthodox are going to get upset, but, I saw this kid 3 years old playing with dolls, etc. I knew this kid had a certain tendency. God's going to take care of such a person. Why would God do such a thing? So what should we say? We should say, a person has a homosexual gene, maybe. Maybe science is going to come and figure that out. But you know what? There are anger genes. There are miserly genes. There are I don't want to share genes. I might have all of these, all together. There's being conceited gene. So even if that person has a certain dispensation, doesn't mean God wants them to act on it. Even if it's proven it's genetic. But someone will say, come on, you don't think God's going to have mercy? Well, I'm not playing God. I'm not putting on my funny George Burns glasses, my funny mustache, and I'm not going to zap anyone over here. I'm not playing God over here, right? God is going to judge it, but obviously, these are within the boundaries of forbidden relationships. That entire chapter speaks about forbidden relationship. There's a verse in there that speaks about sorcery, but the majority of the chapter, which we read on Yom Kippur by the afternoon service, is about immorality. So this is forbidden, even for a non-Jew. Even for a Noahide, it's going to be forbidden as well. Forbidden relationship. Now, that being said, how can someone who's going to claim to be an Orthodox Jew, not only that, an Orthodox rabbi, and say that, they're not going to die for that. They're not going to pay the price for that. Some people are just born that way. Well, some people are also born angry. Some people are wired in a certain way. That doesn't butter the biscuit. That doesn't answer the question. That may be true, right? But that means we have certain, people have certain dispensation. People could have greater anger genes than other people. People could be, want to give more charity, even maybe they can't. Other people don't want to give charity at all. There are many things that we may be wired with against our control. But God says, if it's bad, I don't want you to act on it. But if it's bad, why'd you give it to me? So everything we have is a test. Sometimes we're wired that way. Sometimes we do it to ourselves, right? We can do things. We can act in a certain way. We can see things we're not allowed to, hear things we're not allowed to. And at the end, it has an effect on us. It can have a tremendously negative effect. So God says, I didn't tell you to do that. I didn't wire you that way. You did it to yourself. They got no one else to blame. Yeah, but now that's a part of me, it's harder to fight. You're right. Because the more things we do that are bad, and we do it, we do it again, we do it again, we do it again. So what happens? It becomes part of us. Much, much harder to fight. Right? That 100% is true. Right? But somebody like this, who's gonna whitewash it and is gonna say, you cannot blame that person. Well, who am I supposed to blame? Me? It's my fault. Everything's my fault. That's for sure. Right? You're gonna blame. You're gonna say it's God's fault. It's the world's fault. Whose fault is it? Right? Person has to take responsibility for their actions. Right? So somebody like that, who's gonna, that is absolutely heretical, and that person should be called out. And they're gonna say, oh, but it's lashon hara. If the person, according to the Rambam, let's make clear, according to the Rambam says in the laws of repentance, someone who believes, everything the Torah is true except one verse, considered a heretic, right? He doesn't believe in everything that Moshe Rabbeinu said. He's a heretic. There's a whole laundry list of things, whether he knows more, whether he knows less, right? It doesn't matter. But there are times where if people like this are going to lead people astray, then it's my obligation, maybe other people's obligation, to say something, right? Because again, that's going too far, right? That's going way too far. But let's say, so that's something egregious. So if someone goes off the rails and they say things absolutely against the Torah, that's heresy. Again, it doesn't matter what they know or what they don't know, right? It's still considered heresy. If they don't know very much, they grew up as a potato farmer in Idaho. No offense, anyone grew up as a potato farmer, grew up in Idaho. They grew up knowing nothing. So they're still going to get punished. And if they desecrate Shabbos on purpose because they don't know, they're in trouble. Because the Torah says you get the death penalty and you get spiritually cut off. Right? So if that's the case, ignorance isn't bliss. Right? You have a certain status, there are certain repercussions. Okay. So now we're not going to say necessarily something egregious. Right? What if there's a difference of opinion? I'll give you another example. The majority of ultra-Orthodox rabbis today hold that a Jew is not allowed to go in the Temple Mount. Right? There's a problem going up there because we don't know exactly where the Holy of Holies is, right, etc. So a person has to be careful where they step. There are other rabbinical authorities that say we know the exact place where you can step, and therefore, they allow people to go up there. Now, there are political ramifications over here. Certainly the Arabs don't want any Jew going up there, certainly not to pray, certainly not to try and bring up a sacrifice. I don't think there's any question. The Arabs will stop you, the police will stop you, but they do allow from time to time, they'll allow Jews to walk up there. Now, there's the majority of rabbinical authorities today, again, the majority hold you're not allowed to do it. We're in the state of impurity. We don't have a temple. Going to the mikveh for a month with a snorkel and a rubber ducky is not going to help. Right? That type of impurity will never go off. So you're not allowed to put yourself in such a situation. You tell me there are some people who will tell you 100% they know exactly where to stand. Right? But again, there's an idea we go according to the majority for good. And the majority of rabbis for good say, listen, it's a danger. You don't want to get spiritually cut off. You shouldn't do it. But there are people that's, maybe a little bit hot-headed. They may think, well, I know what I'm doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, so I don't have to listen to them. Now, the Torah also tells me, if there's an elder of the generation who goes against the rabbis, goes against the Kohanim, right? In other words, they all agree on one thing, and he defies them. What's the punishment? Death. You can't have rabble-rousers here, right? You have to go according to the majority. Now, there are certain things, as the English would say, that may be a little bit dicey, right? A little bit dicey, meaning that maybe there's a difference of opinion. Maybe, let's say by wearing tzitzis. We'll use that as an example, right? There's a command in the Torah when you wear tzitzis, those fringes, right, that you wear a four-corner garment, you should wear techelis, right, that blue string. So you'll see some people wear it. There are people that wear it, and there are other people that don't. Now, what's the disagreement of opinion? The disagreement of opinion over here is whether that blue dye that they use is the exact same blue dye as they used, in previous generations, right, by the time of the temple. Now, some will swear we have the exact same thing. We have the exact same thing. Thing is, it's been lost. So it's been rediscovered, let's say, in the last 20 years, 30 years, whatever it is. There are more people wearing it today, I would say, but the vast majority are not. So my Rebbe would say, right, it says, Mori v'Rebbe, Arav going to Moshe Star Moshlita should be well. And he would say, you don't put something on, or you don't do a mitzvah that we don't have a clear-cut tradition. Right? But what's the caveat here? The caveat here is, right, there's an opinion that this blue thread that you put on, it doesn't nullify the mitzvah of tzitzis. So if it doesn't nullify the mitzvah of tzitzis, at best, I'm not doing anything wrong, right? I'm not adding an extra string. Doesn't nullify the mitzvah. Okay, but at the same time, what if it's the right thing? Then I get the mitzvah, right? So I'm not losing, I'm only gaining, right? Either it could be the right thing for the mitzvah, or I didn't do anything. And my tzitzis that I wear are still kosher. So, even if that would be the case, I'm not doing anything wrong. And not only that, I might actually get the mitzvah wearing the chelis today, and I would get that mitzvah every single day, right? So really, I'm not losing out. I only have what to gain. Even in that case, many rabbinical authorities, including my Rebbe, would say it's not a clear-cut tradition. The vast majority of people are not wearing it. If the vast majority of people are not wearing it, we don't do it, right? That's a very, very strong opinion in rabbinic literature. Now, that being said, there could be other things, other things that let's say you're not lacking anything by not doing it, but if you do it, then it really doesn't mean a whole lot. Maybe it makes you feel good. There are mitzvahs that, there are things that a person could do. Maybe if they wear it, it makes them feel good. Give an example. A woman comes to this rabbi, she wants to wear a tallis. She wants to wear a tallis, big time feminist, whatever. She wants to wear a tallis. So the rabbi says, fine, here's a tallis, wear it. So she comes back 2 weeks later, she says, Rabbi, says, you don't understand all the spirituality, what this tallis did for me, and I was wrapped in it, and you can't imagine the spirituality it did for me. The rabbi answers, I don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea what you're talking about. So what do you mean? You gave me this tallis, I've been wearing it for 2 weeks during my prayers. In my prayers, I just felt like I'm a new person, so much closer to God. The rabbi says, you didn't wear a tallis. She's like, what are you talking about? I got these these strings over here. Rabbi says, yeah, but before I gave it to you, I cut off one of the strings. I made the mitzvah totally invalid. So he said, basically, you're wearing an oversized towel with a bunch of fringes on it, but it wasn't tzitzis. You didn't get the mitzvah of tzitzis. It didn't affect your soul. It didn't do anything. Now you understand how your soul can be affected without it, right? But this woman was like flabbergasted. Like, what do you mean? So what did I feel? So you might have felt something. You might have felt something more spiritual, but you're not feeling anything that has to do with the mitzvah, right? Let's make clear. You're not doing anything. That's not the mitzvah, right? It's not the mitzvah. So therefore, even in something, something like that, now we can say that, for a woman today, a tallis really become a male garment, and the Torah says women can't wear male garments, men can't wear female garments. Technically, maybe if they made it into a female garment, maybe we would say it's okay, but whatever, there are other issues. There are other issues as well. It's not the topic for now. But you can see, maybe their difference of opinion, can have major, major ramifications, right? One ramification could be whether you're liable to be spiritually cut off or not. I mean, that's a pretty serious thing. A Jew walks up on the Temple Mount. It's almost like playing Russian roulette to a certain extent. You got one in 15 chance. You got a 15%, 16% chance that nothing's going to happen. So over here, you say, no, I know exactly where to stand. It's not going to be a problem, right? But what if you're wrong? What if your calculation is wrong? If your calculation is wrong and you didn't repent for what you did, you get spiritually cut off. Right? Who wants to take that type of chance? So you could have people that, I'm not going to say flaunt rabbinical authority, right? Or maybe they think they're their own rabbinical authority, right? But the reality is there are many things that we do agree on, right? The vast majority, let's say, the laws of Shabbos, there are some differences between Ashkenazim and Sephardim, right? And Sephardic people. 99%, I'd probably say maybe a little bit less, we agree on, when it comes to laws of Shabbos and the laws of Lashon Hara, and everything else. There are certain things, certain customs, that we disagree on, and there are things, that maybe we might have lost. There are things that maybe we do with a stringency, maybe some do, maybe some don't, but you have to understand, this is a 2,000 year or more, odyssey, where, the Jewish people, after coming out of the desert, etc., they go into the land of Israel, and then all the terrible pogroms and everything else, right? So things weren't so clear. People were destroyed, people were, exiled. They had to write it down, and they had to review everything they learned, right? So the obvious question, well, isn't that a big game of telephone? How do we know we have the right thing today? Because there were many different chains. There were thousands and thousands of chains of people who are going to remember whatever they need to remember. The problem was, because of dispersion and because of destruction, rabbis felt these things had to be written down. If it wouldn't be written down, it would have been lost. But they had to verify if, what they were saying was true, was 100% true. You see it all the time. The Talmud will ask a question, one of the rabbis will answer and they'll say, hey, but how do you know? I have another source over here, or I have this source, I have this question, or whatever. So a lot of times the question is going to be, how do I know what he says is really authentic? Right? How do I know this is really true? It has to be tested. It has to be tried. Right? Not everyone's going to agree, but we do go according to the majority in most cases. If there's a minority opinion, against the rabbis, we go like the rabbis. Right? There's no question. There is a certain hierarchy, of two rabbis that disagree, who we go like and why. There is a certain, hierarchy. So then we have to see. Then we have to go through, a litmus test, and test it. But, who's to say that we're going to agree on everything, in one shot? The Torah itself is an outline. Torah does not give us any definitions. Torah says don't kill, don't steal. Torah tells me I have to sit in a booth, on Sukkot. I have no idea. It's got walls, doesn't have walls. What's this sweet, this nice smelling fruit? Some people think it's a quince. Some people think it's an apple, pineapple, watermelon. No one in the right mind is going to think it's a lemon on steroid, right? No one's going to think it's an esrog. How do I know it's an esrog? Because of oral law. But again, when you go through case by case by case, and you see where they're getting it from, but there are always questions. There are always questions to see, is that really what it meant? How did I learn it? How is it done? I'm going to speak later, the Noahide laws, I'm going to go through different things, where the Talmud came from, the Mishnah, the Gemara, all kinds of other things, and extrapolate and see where the Noahide laws come from, right? Because people are going to say, come on, the Noahide laws, they're not in the Torah. I mean, they were passed down, right, from that Adam got it, he passed it down to Noah passed it down, added one himself and whatever, ended up passing it down. But where'd it come from? How do we know? So there's extrapolation, right? There's what we call biblical exegesis, that, as we said before, in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 17, the rabbis have a right. They have the right to interpret. They, in every generation, they can't just go against what the Torah says, but they have a right 100%, to interpret, right? So we're going to explain how this all works, how it all fits together, right? So now, where does this all go? Because someone's going to say, well, how do I know? Let's say in this generation, there's a difference of opinion between, top rabbinic scholars. So you're going to say, well, how do I know what to do? So either if there's a consensus, who we go like, fine. If there's not a consensus, right? So then the person has their own personal rabbi. They'll say, how do we hold? What do we do? Right? What do I do in this situation? Right? So if he has a certain custom, or obviously probably knows better, so he knows what most people do. Hopefully they'll know. If they don't, they'll find out. But in general, even if there's a difference of opinion, we have to see where the different opinion comes from. We have to see what their ramifications are. I mean, what we said before, the ramifications can be unbelievable. But again, you got to say, well, it's interpretation, right? Well, oral law is the running commentary here, right? And had the pogroms, the dispersions, the destruction of the temple, and the exile and all that not happened, they would have been in one place. They would have been in the land of Israel. It would have been very easily solidified. Very easily solidified. Right? In other words, this question, that question, the other question. If they're all more or less in the same place, then you wouldn't have had any arguments. It would have been very easy. Did he say this? No. I would have loved that. Did he really say this? No. Is that what he meant? No, because he didn't say it. He didn't say it. Very good. So if he didn't say it, the arguments go way down. You're not going to have that, the tractates are not going to be that big, right? Because it's going to be a heck of a lot more clarity. But the problem is, as time went on, okay, there were thousands of chains who were trying to remember the Mishnah, and what other, what great rabbis said, or what their rabbi said, and all that. And then they compared notes, and that's how it all got organized, right? But again, if it's done, the way it should have been done was orally. Now, what can happen with something that's oral? Now, something that's oral, you're going to remember a lot more, because if you have to give it over to someone else, you have to teach someone else, you better know it very well. Because if you don't know it very well, I've seen this time and time again, people make videos, so-called rabbis or whatever, give over certain things, and you come out more confused than when you went in, right? So that means that they didn't have clarity on the subject either. So if you're going to give over a class, you should have clarity, right? You should definitely know what you're talking about, because if not, you're just going to confuse everybody else. So that being the case, when somebody has to learn something and they have to give it over to someone else, you're going to remember it a lot more, right? Because, every 30 days, the Talmud says, many of the rabbis reviewed what they learned, everything that they learned. They would review over and over and over and over. So that's great. They would have it like the back of their hand. Only problem is, there was exile, right? Destruction of the temple. People got dispersed. So, they had to gather from here, from there, etc. Who said what, when, where, all these things. So there's a lack of clarity. There'd be a lack of clarity exactly what was said. Not that nothing was said. They know definitely things were said. That's pretty clear. The question is there veracity to what they said? Because I have another source here. I have another thing over here. Right? So that's how you can have disagreements. And even in the, let's say the last generation, right? What was the major question that came up in the last generation that the great rabbis had to decide? And that is about electricity. Is electricity in the laws of Shabbos, is it considered lighting a fire or not? So, most rabbinical authorities have it's definitely forbidden. The only question is what category, does it come under? So some people say, come on, I turn on the light, I turn it off, it doesn't do anything, right? That's not really considered work, right? So, it's not necessarily about work. I can take my sofa, my heavy sofa, I can move it back and forth, my living room, all day on Shabbos if I want. I'd be, kind of foolish to do it, but that's not forbidden. Why isn't it forbidden? It's not forbidden over. It doesn't come under one of the categories. I might have transgressed Coffman's 615th commandment. Don't be a moron. But okay, if I'm busy doing it, it's not a transgression over here. So it's not about work. So someone will say, but it doesn't do anything. I said, okay, I got a great idea. I got a beautiful idea. Take off the plastic to the light socket. Take off the plastic, unscrew the screw. They said, okay, I take off the plastic, now what? Now take a screwdriver and stick it right in. Stick it into the live wire. They're going to get, what are you, an idiot? I'm not going to do that. If I do that, I'm going to electrocute it. I said, but you just told me it doesn't do anything. I turn it off. There's a current in there, right? right? There's something going on, right? It's something so powerful. Could it cause a fire? Could cause a fire, right? 100% it could cause a fire. Is it similar to fire in that sense? Maybe some will argue that. Others argue a different category. Comes in a totally different category, right? But they had to understand, what it was. Because, that's adding to the Torah. How is that adding to the Torah? That's trying to find precedent what it is, right? A microwave, it cooks. I wouldn't say it's exactly the same as an oven. Doesn't work like an oven, but it does a similar thing. It gets the thing piping hot. Probably kill you in the process. All these microwaves or whatever. But okay, it comes in handy. You want to heat something up in 2 minutes. Very good. Is that the same? With gas? Gas is definitely fire. Stick your hand in it, you burn it, right? Electric. That's definitely like fire. No question. Microwave not exactly the same, but it does. It does a similar thing. So the rabbis on that, there was pretty much a consensus, right, in the Orthodox community that it was forbidden. The only question was, what category? So then there's a question. There's a question where, what about something, let's say by Noahites, for instance. What about something that they could take on, but it's always, we mentioned, we did a show on this about moral imperative, right? Let's say speaking Lashon Hara. Speaking Lashon Hara does not apply to them. All right, it doesn't apply to them. Now, there are different reasons. So, therefore, if it doesn't apply, and the Noahide wants to be careful, they want to be careful not speaking badly against others, right? Is that going to uplift them? Yeah, it'll make them a better person because they're not backbiting, backstabbing, all that, etc. So that would definitely draw them closer to God. They have an obligation. They don't have an obligation. Certainly not an obligation. There'll be some of these quote unquote super Noahides that want to sit in a sukkah on sukkahs, or want to keep Shavuos, even though Shavuos is about God giving the Torah to the Jewish people. Doesn't apply. Shabbos, same thing. So some people say, but I want to do it anyway. And the Rambam says any mitzvah I do, I get credit for. Yeah, but he also says you're not allowed to keep Shabbos. Right? They're not allowed to keep Shabbos. Not only are they not allowed to keep Shabbos, certainly like a Jew, they can't make up their own religion. And they can't take things from us, things that don't apply. Right? Because there are 3 things that apply to a Jew that are signs that make the Jewish people who they are. One of them is Shabbos, right? The sign between God and the Jewish people. One of them is tefillin, phylacteries, whatever you want to call them. The other is bris milah, is circumcision. Now, every couple of years, every 3-4 years, doctors come out and say, take off the foreskin. It's good against cancer, not good against cancer, whatever. But everyone agrees it's something that has to be taken off, right? At least for us. Does that apply to non-Jews? Doesn't apply to non-Jews, right? But the problem is people get carried away, right? So, either you want to be a non-Jew, you want to go one way, right? Or you want to go the other way. But this comes to another point, right? And another point is, and I got in a little bit of trouble for saying this, but I clarified it last night. Pirkei Avos, I'll just, mention it again, right? And that is, I'll mention it again in my Noahide class, and that is that there's a law that the Torah says that someone wants to be a ger toshav. What's a ger toshav? A ger toshav is somebody that lives in the land of Israel, a non-Jew. They deny idolatry, and they have to make a statement in front of a rabbinical court and say in front of the rabbinical court, I'm taking on the Noahide laws, I'm going against idolatry, and it gets certified by a rabbinical court. Now, so the Rambam states clear, make no mistake, the Rambam states clear, that's talking about a ger toshav. 100%, it's not talking about a Noahide. Right? Now, some people will say, a Noahide, they should make a declaration. Right? They should make a declaration and say, I'm going to uphold the Noahide laws. And the reason I'm going to uphold the Noahide laws, some Noahides don't know this, is that it's because Moshe Rabbeinu got the Torah from God and passed it down to us. That's why I have to hold by the Noahide laws. So that's kind of a crucial thing. The Rambam says that, a non-Jew, has to do that. Now, the question is, they should make a declaration. Maybe some say they should make a declaration in front of a witness. That's not a bad thing to do. Do they have an obligation? They don't have an obligation. They have zero obligation, right? So my statement, which I got a lot of flack for, was the fact that if you write up a piece of paper and you have 3 rabbis sign on it, and a non-Jew makes this declaration, is the paper worth anything they wrote on? No. You know why it's not worth anything? Because they don't have an obligation. There's 0 obligation. None. Now, if a non-Jew, before anyone, rips my head off here, if a non-Jew wants to do it, they feel better about making this declaration. It makes they have a connection with the rabbinical court. It uplifts their spirit, so to speak. Are they allowed to do such a thing? They're allowed to, right? I never made the claim they're not allowed to, right? 100% they're allowed to do it. Are they obligated? Nobody says they're obligated, right? I shouldn't say nobody. There are some that do say, right? But we don't hold that way. Practically speaking, it doesn't have to be done, right? So I made this whole big stink last week because I want people making up their own things, right? You want to stay in on Jew, that's fine. So why do you need this piece of paper? The piece of paper is not worth that much. If you go and someone comes to the land of Israel, they go in, they show the chief rabbi, they show them this piece of paper. It's beautiful. Does that do anything for them? Doesn't do anything for them. If you want to talk about Jubilee Year, which we're never going to have, right? This Jubilee Year, maybe after the Messiah comes, and they want to have the status of a Grantosha if they survive the war of Gog and Magog, that I understand. Then I understand clear. You go in front of a rabbinical court. Otherwise, we mentioned before in the laws of Kashrus, we mentioned in Leviticus chapter 11, one of the commentaries says, does a non-Jew have to keep kosher? No. Why don't they have to keep kosher? Because a non-Jew doesn't do anything, doesn't make any rational sense. Doesn't benefit them. Why? Because you see they eat all kinds of creepy crawly things. We won't talk about the bats in Wuhan, right? They're eating all kinds of crazy things. It doesn't affect them physically. By Jews, we're not allowed to. It affects us in a negative way, totally negative way. But someone could come and say, okay, you're right. The piece of paper it's written on is not really worth that much. But for me, it's a benefit. For me, 100% it's a benefit to have my name there, to make the declaration, to have 3 rabbis sign it. Okay? That is worth something, right? So I'm not going to say that's forbidden. It's not forbidden, right? It's totally not forbidden. Do I have an obligation? Nobody has an obligation. Nobody has an obligation to do it. You want to do it? That's great. You could do it. I just want to make sure people understand that, okay, it looks very nice. They feel very good about it. Halachically speaking, when it comes to Jewish law, it has 0 ramifications, right? In other words, the difference is, let's say a non-Jew would make a declaration. They make a declaration between them, themselves, and themselves. Civil complex. In front of all 3 of them, they make a declaration. And they make the declaration and they say, I'm going to keep the Noahide laws, and I'm going to do it, because Moshe Rabbeinu said, etc. And they make that declaration. The only person that heard it is themselves. Is that a valid declaration? According to everybody, it's valid. Some would say it's better to say in front of a witness. Okay, right? But according to everybody, it's valid. So someone wants to take it to another level. They want to take it to another level. They have an obligation? No. Is there a benefit? Is there a physical benefit here? I call it a spiritual benefit. There is a spiritual benefit, right? That there's no question, right? So, but the Rambam, the Rambam is saying clear. It's only talking about, a Grantosha. Then you have to go in front of a rabbinical court. Anybody wants to go in front of a rabbinical court, otherwise they're allowed to, right? So you're going to say, okay, so you disagree with others. You're right, right? So this is where it comes to the fact that, you can have rabbis in generation. Here, there's no ramification halachically. If they want to do it, fine. They don't fry in hell forever if they don't. But it's got the same ramifications because, I would say maybe if they do it in front of a rabbinical court, what's going to happen? What if they go against the Noahide laws? Now, if they go against the Noahide laws, maybe that's more severe. Maybe they're making a declaration and now they're fudging the declaration. They're going against what they put on paper. But at the same time, if a person made a declaration, right, they made it in front of themselves or, in front of someone else, whatever the case is, they make the declaration, they don't write anything down. Does it have any other ramifications? The ramifications are exactly the same. If they fudge it, they get the same punishment, right? 100% they're going to get the same punishment. If they write it down, I could hear that maybe it's worse because now you're making a formal declaration, right? But on the other hand, I would say no. you're saying the same thing, you're just writing it down, signing with witnesses. Maybe there's more power, maybe. I can hear the other side, right? So you can have people disagree, right? So I was a little more graphic, right? Because one of my personal pet peeves is I don't want to see people making up a new religion. I've already seen people do that and lead other people astray, right? And if the majority of people don't do it, and the majority of rabbinical authorities say don't do it, so why are you going to do it? Why would someone do it? Even though it's not worth the paper it's written on, because a person feels spiritually inclined to do it. Okay? So I will agree. I will agree. But the problem is, as we say, you got to listen to what the rabbis say. And you got to go according to the majority, right? That's our obligation. We can agree to disagree, right? So some people will say, well, you went off the rails a little bit. Yeah, I did. And the reason I went off the rails is because, there have been groups out there totally distorting Torah for non-Jews, right? Giving, people doing the right thing, giving them a bad name because they're calling out everybody and their mother, who disagrees with them. So for people to do things, as my Rebbe said, and that's a little bit different, to do something that you're going to say is a mitzvah when there's no tradition on it. So here we're not going to say necessarily it's not a tradition. Okay, there's a difference of opinion. So you think, what? Me? You're going to yell and scream, and you're going to say, it's not worth the paper, it's written on. That could offend people. You're right. Right? It could offend people. It wasn't meant to offend people. It was meant to show. It was meant to show that, okay, if a person wants to do it, they can, but they have to understand there's no halachic ramifications. And if they understand there's no halachic ramifications, and they still want to do it, okay. But if it's something, which we mentioned earlier, if it's something that, is heretical and goes against Torah, right, etc., that's a lot worse. So you can say, okay, didn't the rabbis disagree in every generation? Yeah, but there's a consensus. There's a consensus of what we're allowed to do, what we can do, right? And what the halacha shows, is the halacha or not. So therefore, that's why you have rabbis in every generation that can decide that. So fine, you could be on one side of the scale, you could be on the other side of the scale. So even though you had the disagreement, we'll go back to Hillel and Shammai. So even though you had the disagreement between Hillel and Shammai, it did not stop them from marrying one and the other, right? To marrying into families. Even though they had very strong disagreements, even if according to, to some, they're, problematic and certain things, they still accepted the other side, right? They still had respect, right? So you say today, well, it doesn't seem like people have respect. It seems like people are just trying to call everybody out and say what they're doing is wrong. And it depends, right? It depends on what it is. We mentioned if it's something egregious and it's something that's forbidden, it's leading people astray, they have to be called out. That's not a problem of lashon hara. If it's things, I had somebody, tell me a certain thing. I'll just throw this out there as well, right? As we're getting ready to end here. Someone told me I want to do X thing, right? I want to do X thing, and I said we don't, we don't do it. But then, it started giving me all kinds of, trying to give me all kinds of rationale. Why it shouldn't be forbidden, why should it be okay, and blah, blah, blah. So finally, I told this person like this. I said, the custom is we don't do it. There are a lot of reasons why we don't do it. And in the end, if you do this and people know about it, I said, you have 2 sons you want to marry off. You'll never marry them off. I said, 100% you'll never marry them off because they're going to think you're 100% a fruitcake. Because you're doing something that no one else does. You're doing something way out of the norm. Totally out of the norm. And if people get wind of that and they know, it doesn't matter why you think you're doing it. Right? Nobody does. It's forbidden. We don't do it. Yeah, but don't you? I told you. It doesn't matter what I think. Right? It matters what the rabbinic establishment thinks. Not only that, but as we said before, if it looks a little bit dodgy and strange, and you want to marry off kids, you're in trouble. You're in trouble because they're going to think you're out of your mind. They're going to think you're not normal, right? So you got to toe the line. Also, it doesn't mean, if a person, I'll throw them one other thing out there, and that is that sometimes people pick and choose who the rabbis are. Meaning they have a question in blessings. Oh, this rabbi's always lenient. I'll ask him. Or, it comes to family purity laws, he's always lenient, I'll ask him. You don't have to do that, right? You should have one rabbi for everything. Not everyone does, because not everyone's certainly not a world expert, in all things. I've been fortunate for the last 25 years, almost 26 years. I have a connection with my Rebbe that, he knows everything about everything. So, I take the stringencies with the leniencies, but I don't pick and choose my rabbis here based on I want an easier answer, or, whatever the case is. Also an issue, right? There's also an issue over here. So yeah, they can disagree. We can understand maybe why they disagree or not, right, etc. But there always has to be, mutual respect. And sometimes, in the heat of an argument, something can be said, and it can be said very strong, right? People mistake someone who yells and screams, like myself, for instance. Why do they have to yell and scream? It's about passion. It's about something, not something I love to do, about yelling and screaming. But, you get all cooked up. You get all excited about something. You see people doing the wrong thing, or people lead astray. You don't sit back and just say, well, that's okay. We're not going to call them out. I'm going to be at worst, as we would say in Boston. I'm not going to say anything. Sometimes things have to be said, right? And sometimes people have to understand, I'm doing this great thing. It's like the woman wearing the talis. You did a great thing, but it's not a talis. You didn't do a mitzvah over here. You didn't do anything. So she, okay, she felt bad, but she had to be put in her place. She had to understand. If you put a talis on and it has strings missing where it makes it forbidden to wear as a talis, it's not a talis. It's a nice shawl, but it's not a talis. You're not doing a mitzvah, right, over here. So, same thing with the snow white thing. They think they're doing something, okay. They can think they're doing it. Very good. It makes them feel good. Let them do it. Let them do it. I'm not going to be opposed to it. At the same time, if they understand there's no halachic ramifications, fine, right? But there's a fine line. I just want people to understand there's a fine line between what halacha says and what I want to do, right? And you can't straddle those lines. And that was really my point, which again, I got a little bit of flack for, but that's okay, and that is, people have to understand. They have to understand if there's, people will say, if you're so into Torah, you're so into mitzvahs, why don't you convert? Why don't you non-Jews convert? Why don't you Noahites convert? Right? So I'm going to say I don't have to convert. I'm not interested in converting. I still like to eat shrimp. I still like to do other things. I don't want to convert. My spouse doesn't want to convert. But that's not an answer for them, right? But they have to keep what they need to keep. That's fine. And if it's something that doesn't have, halachic ramifications, they want to do it. I'm not going to say they're not allowed to do it. Right? If someone put me in a corner and say, is it a good thing to do? If you feel like it is, do it. If it makes you feel better, it makes you, it's an uplift in spirituality because you're doing something in front of others and it gives you legitimacy in front of a rabbinical court. Okay? Right? But, you have to understand, the other, the other side also. But this is, these things are, I see we're out of time, but, these things are loaded things. And, sometimes, okay, there needs to be a clarification. People need to understand. And things can get heated. Things can definitely get heated because we get excited about Torah. We really want the truth. We want people to go in the right path. That's what it is. We're not here to put people down. We're not here to make people feel bad. We want people to understand, it's not my way, the highway. I'm not saying that. There are, other ways to look at things. 100%. If you're within the realm of Torah, that's fine. If you're not in the realm of Torah and you're doing things that you should never do and people leading astray, that's a different issue. So, on that, I'm going to stop there. How was that?
I think that is working out perfectly.
See, I got it right down to the T because I never know if you're there or not.
Yeah, you're getting much better at it, that is for certain. So, excellent. Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed the show. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Very important. Turn on notifications. Make sure you click on the bell icon that says all. That way you're notified with every single action that goes on. So, with that said, you guys have a great week, and we'll see you next week, same time, same place, Hashem willing, or in 15 minutes with Rabbi Shulman. Stay tuned.
אתם תמיד תמיד כולם ביחד, חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד, איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה והכניסה